I met Pat the beginning of our sophomore year, 1966. We remained friends all through high school. We went on camping trips, fishing trips, talked about life, shared our dreams together. And right now, I miss Pat. I'm not in a celebratory mood. I think he robbed us too early of his life. On these camping trips that we had, I think we had a shared tackle box. And there was a hook that kind of got us through a lot of camping trips together. We caught fish and remained strong and stuff. And so we created the hook and I hung it on my Volkswagen mirror. And we said, may the hook never fall. So what that represented was our friendship. And the hook was our friendship. And it was, may the hook never fall. And that's what I'm saying now. I don't want to get flowery, but I miss him still bad. And to Pat, may the hook never fall.
I'm standing in the small slave cemetery on the property of Fairplay Camp School. It was a place that was really special to Chief Pat because he had invested over 10 years of his life as the educational coordinator here at camp. I always loved when Pat came back to camp and he would tell stories and he would bring his guitar and he would sing songs with us. And he would help us uncover truths and details and little parts of history that had been overlooked or maybe not passed on. And Pat had this unique curiosity that made you want to be with him and that made you want to learn and made you want to use your imagination. Pat inspired others with this curiosity and this love for learning to dig below the surface. Pat was such a kind and gentle friend, and I always loved the way he could explain the things that he believed in ways that inspired other people.
Hi from a rainy Scotland. Sorry for no subtitles, hope you can understand. Patrick and I met in 2012 through a shared love of the outdoors, forest school and outdoor education in general for children and young people. And we kept in touch over the years through Facebook and Messenger, and I found Patrick to be such an inspirational man, not only educationally and the way that he taught and the way that he interacted with people, but also he just came across as being the most gentle, loving soul that Scott and I have ever met, and also had a great sense of humour. And I wanted to share with you a wee video that Patrick sent to me just not long after lockdown started here in Scotland. And when we were discussing on Messenger about the restrictions and being limited to one walk a day with our pets, and this is what he sent.
This news, I am fucking raging. 1 walk a day. 1 walk a day. I'm used to 3 walks. Sometimes 4. Do you know how many pees I like to do? How many shites I like to do? How many arses I like to sniff? How many leftover pee I like to sniff on the ground? That's my whole social life out the bloody window. I'm fucking raging. I'm not happy at all. I'm going to piss in the corner.
I just want to send lots of love to Leslie and all the people in Patrick's family, and just know and try and take some comfort from the fact that he made such an impact in so many people's lives, and he was such a wonderful person. Thank you for letting me be part of this memorial. Sending lots and lots of love.
I'm Becky Sessions with Woodfield. Happy to say a few things about Pat Pritchard. As head of school, I worked really closely with Pat. Pat was chairman of our board for several years, for many years, and also served on the board for years beforehand, before taking on chairman. And then we also worked on some things when he was representing the Arboretum Committee at Wesleyan and the multidisciplinary committee that I was a part of, that Woodfield was partnering with Wesleyan on a large federal grant. And so we've done many things professionally, and many things that were very, very meaningful for the development of Woodfield Academy. Where we are today is by and large due to the tone that he brought, and his experience and his background and his understanding of how children develop, and how to work with people and how to be with people, how to love people, how to teach. Pat almost seemed larger than life to me. Pat could do anything. I don't think there's a tool he didn't have. I don't think there's a song he couldn't sing, a poem that he couldn't recite, a trail he couldn't walk, a school he couldn't build. And Pat was also a very dear friend, and I cherish all of the memories of our time together. I learned so much from that guy, and I just really mostly felt humbled to be in the moment many times when certain things would happen, when we would figure something out or realize something and just kind of be like, how did we not know that? Or what happened? And then something would come out of his mind, and through his words of either well, that's the Woodfield way, or Woodfield is going to be Woodfield. Woodfield is developing in its own time. It is becoming what it is destined to be, and we are just privileged to be here to sort of be the guardrails around that mission, to help pave the way a bit, to recruit others, to bring in more, to lead this movement of give your child a chance to be the person that he or she was perfectly made to be. This movement of the child you bring is exactly the way they are supposed to be. They are who they are. Let's see how we can discover ways to help them have an easier time of things, and maybe to reach a few more of their dreams. So what Pat brought and what Pat helped make is 20-some years old, but is still only just beginning. It will refresh, and it will remain moldable and flexible, and it will remain. It will always be what it is supposed to be for the children who are supposed to be here. That's the way of Woodfield. Thank you, Pat. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your work. Thank you for giving a lot of sweat and time. We miss you. Thank you.
So I'm going to try to sum up something that's not very easy to really take the measure of, and that is the friendship that I was blessed with Pat. So one thing that comes to mind, these are not in a particular order, but one thing that comes to mind was a cassette tape that I shared with him, and it was by a theater troupe called A Traveling Jewish Theater, and the name of the performance or the program, this goes back, I'm thinking it goes back 20 plus years, was Stories Make the World. And so one of the things that was a shared love for us was storytelling and the power of the story, and that the stories that we tell are the way we understand who we are. The stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell other people, and we just reveled in folklore and stories from various cultures. We met over a cup of coffee at Jittery Joe's and then Z Beans, and enjoyed meeting on Friday at Just Tapped for Jews and Brews, and he was the one who said to me, I'm going to send the Jews to you who don't know you, who need to know who you are, and I'll send them your way. And he did. And another thing we had in common is he enjoyed hot sauce and I enjoy making it, and so we exchanged foods that we made, and I remember his Scuppernong squeeze and the warmth and the what it was like to be over his house, and to meet his friends also. We had an idea that I pray that we figure out a way to pick up the ball. It was an idea that was batted around not too long ago before he became ill. And it was the idea of creating a folk society to look at other places that have folk societies where they combine dance and music and food and people coming together in these wonderful ways as a community building, joyous activity. And I hope someday soon there is a folk society that gets to take this idea of his and make his memory grow into something beautiful. And what else do I have in my notes? Yes, I guess I would say, well, a couple things. One is, he once, at a certain point, he had heard the band that I play in, Blue Sky Blue, and he was a fan. And he told us he was we needed to play in the cabin at the Arboretum. So he got us in there several years back, and made that happen, and it became a real favorite place for us to play and see community in that way. So he was just a wonderful fan of the band in that way. And I guess the thing I would say to try to pull it all together is when I think of just a few days ago on Rosh Hashanah, when I was in synagogue and I was preaching, and I talked about stories and I talked about words, and I talked about the letters that glued together to make words, and I needed to bring his name to mind and say it aloud, and it was a deeply emotional moment for me because I am still processing this grief of him being gone. I remember last year at Sukkot, so in the fall, when he was sitting in the backyard, and I'm still grasping at his very felt absence. But when I think of certain friends in my life as fellow travelers, where we are traveling the journey of our life, the 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, and we enrich each other and we change each other, and we know you never know who you meet on your journey and how long they get to be with you, but it dawns on you that because they walked the walk with you, that they changed you, and they enriched your life and really elevated you as a person. And I know that his memory is going to flourish as a blessing for all of us. I miss you, Pat.
Hi, I'm Karen Bray. This is Oscar Bray. Say hi. Hi. Patrick was a colleague of mine at Wesleyan College, but more importantly, he was my Macon family, and most importantly, he was this guy. Me and Leslie, he is in spirit this guy's family. Perhaps no one more than Patrick reiterated to me that Macon and Wesleyan could be my home, and for that, I'll be forever grateful. When I first semester at Wesleyan in 2016, I was feeling really lost. This crazy New Yorker down here in Georgia, right after Trump gets elected, and I didn't know what to do. And then Patrick invited me to his event, Wolves in the Woods, which was this wonderful thing Patrick did in the Arboretum. As you know, if you knew Patrick, he loved the Arboretum. Oscar's repping the Arboretum today. He brought the students together, and we would sing around a fire, and there'd be cast iron skillet, cornbread, and camping out, and just all the wonderful things about learning in other than human nature that Patrick loved. And I was just feeling really lost and alone, and he invited me to be a part of it and to sing and do a ritual around the fire. And that fireplace in the Arb became one of my key touchstones here and happy places. And we sang these lefty hippie songs I grew up with. And Patrick introduced me to other things like Irish hymns and Southern folk songs. Yeah, say hi. Hi. But I felt like home. And he kept doing that. When I bought my home here, which actually I unwittingly didn't know this when I put in the bid, that Patrick himself designed. It's okay, baby. Hi. He helped me christen it by singing in it multiple times. Before there was furniture, there was Patrick and Barry and other friends sitting around my living room playing guitar and singing. And then when I was pregnant with Oscar, for my birthday, he came with others and brought his guitar, and he sang a birthday song about a coming child. And it was, or to a little child. It was clearly a birthday to both me and to Oscar. And that was the beginning, although short because of Patrick's passing, of an intense love and connection between him and my kid. And Oscar was born right before the pandemic. And already Patrick and Leslie came over like a million times. You know, we had 1 week of freedom before the pandemic, and they probably saw him more than anyone besides my immediate family, because they wanted to be here, and they wanted to be here with him and for me and for us. And then when we all did shut down and we weren't seeing anybody, we started doing this thing where every Sunday we would Zoom and sing songs to Oscar. And Patrick would sing lullabies and folk songs and John Prine songs. And Oscar loves music. And I love music, but I'm tone deaf. So Oscar's rhythm, I think he gets from his Uncle Patrick, from those early in utero singing of songs. And then when I had to go back to work in the pandemic, Patrick and Leslie watched Oscar while I taught. And I can't explain the level of gratitude and love and feeling like I'm the single mom in a pandemic, but I have family here, and that's because of Patrick and Leslie. And they took such good care of Oscar. And Leslie would send me pictures of Oscar sleeping on Patrick and the two of them sleeping together. And of them brewing beer together. So Oscar also doesn't mind the taste of beer every time he sneaks one, so I blame that on Patrick too. He gets his music and his love of beer at an early age from Patrick. Macon and Wesleyan wouldn't have been home for me without Patrick. And it's hard to imagine a world without him in it. I had always thought, Oscar does all these new things now and climbs on things, and he really plays music as this 18-month-old. And I always want to call Patrick and show it to him. And when Pat retired, the gift I gave him was a book. And I said, when you finish this eco-philosophy book, we'll get a beer, we'll talk about it, I'll give you your next eco-philosophy book. And we only made it through one book. But every time I read something I think he'd like, I want to call him or watch some documentary or see how much Oscar loves water and nature. So Patrick, who I believe is here diffused in the universe in our kind of pantheism, I hope that you are enjoying this one who loves you, and I love you, and thank you for all you gave us.
My name is Buddy Glass, and I'm here to talk about my friend Pat Pritchard. Excuse the COVID beard. Been 18 months, I guess, since I had a haircut or shaved. In the 11th grade, 1966, I moved back to my hometown of San Antonio. My dad was Air Force, and we lived all over the world, and I was born here, but we didn't come back till I was in the 11th grade, and they enrolled me at Highlands High School over on the southeast side, working class neighborhood. And I had gone to 12 different schools by the time I was in the 11th grade. I was always the new kid. We lived, like I said, all over the world. And it was really kind of hard to make friends. Most people, when you go to a new environment, they have their own cliques formed, and they don't like new kids. I was always a new kid. But when I met Pat, he was different. He was a different kind of guy, man. He was so open and friendly and welcoming. We clicked immediately. It was kind of phenomenal. He was like me, just a real person, and I loved him immediately, and he loved everybody. Everybody loved him. He was that kind of guy. So this was the 60s, right? And we did a few mind-expanding experiments, shall we say, and not a lot, but on occasion. And the last time I saw him, as a matter of fact, was in San Marcos when he was in a freshman at, it wasn't called Texas State then, but in San Marcos. And I went up there with some experiments, and we went to see the Beatles' new movie called Yellow Submarine. What a trip that was, and I will never forget it. And it was in a theater downtown San Marcos that I had been in many times. I spent the first and second grade in San Marcos, and so I'd been in that theater many times, but I hadn't seen it in all those times, all those years. And so that was quite an experience. After that, we kind of drifted apart and went our own ways. I mean, that's what everybody did, and went to the Four Winds. And after about 45 years, this was around 2012, I think, we hooked up again on social media. And we picked up immediately right from where we left off, like we had been talking the day before. It was astounding, the rapport we had and the love we shared. I have a lot of friends in my life. I've met a lot of people, but only a select few did I love like Pat Pritchard, and I consider him my soul brother. He was a real human being. He was incredibly deep and loving and caring, and everyone loved him. He came to San Antonio a few times with Leslie, and another time with Leslie and Sean, and we went with my girlfriend I took him to Rudy's barbecue, the best barbecue in Texas, out on 151. And we just connected at a level that I can't even describe. I don't feel that way about very many people in my life, and I can count them on one hand where I had that kind of a connection. And he was just a very special guy. I just want to say his joy and his serenity is what I call it. He was like a Buddha. He was just serene and joyful and kind of accepting and not judgmental. He is a very special man. And that joy and that serenity kind of spilled out of him and touched all those around him. I want to say my heart goes out to Leslie. I can't imagine what you're going through, and Pat's family and Sean, everyone else, all his friends. We all loved him. If you knew him, you loved him. And the world is a less warm place with him not in it. He is missed, and he's again my soul brother. Miss you, Pat.
My name is Jim Ferrari, and I'm a biology professor at Wesleyan College. Pat Pritchard was a dear friend and colleague at Wesleyan. There's so many stories and memories of my friend that I'd like to share, but instead I'm going to read a poem that I wrote for his retirement party, which was held at the Arboretum Cabin in spring of 2019. For Patrick Pritchard on his retirement. No idle hands, no devil's workshop here. Up early, hewing, fashioning, chopping, brisket grilling, garden tilling, building, cultivating, sawing, strumming moldy folk songs. Hey, just kidding. Conjuring blueberries and scuppernongs, husking glass gems glorious. Brewing stouts and imperials, also questionable ciders. Building bridges, all kinds, ever building. Hill country dirt, Piedmont grit, brick red clay and bogland peat are wedded to his boot treads. Coast to coast trail, shin ink to prove it. Navigating sunny moors and druidic fogs, sauntering, rambling, trekking, tramping. The Arboretum, hitchety, Okmulgee, Lucy still padding along by his side, always walking. Brimming with stories, famous last words, boys camp, shooting stars, midnight trail runs, Cherokee potsherds, wisteria explosions. Texan versus raccoon in the garden, it could go either way. Experiments in simple living, telling moldy hippie stories, hey, just kidding. Avidly studying works by Cheddarman, Iceman, Eve, fellow storytellers, the greatest saga of all, ever telling stories. From commune to community, cauldrons of chili and cornbread communion, again with the brisket, ritually sharing the greasy burnt bits. Lantern walks, campfires, always a spark. From faculty follies to forest follies, from beer church to door and ladder, from canvas teepees to the log cabin, always connecting. We miss you, Patrick.
Hi, I'm Virginia Wilcox, and I'm a professor at Wesleyan College in the Education Department. I actually would not be here if it weren't for Pat Pritchard. He advocated for me to come back and take over as chair of this department very heavily, and that is something that I will forever be grateful for. I sit here in my office tonight, and my office is right next door to where Pat's used to be, and it's quiet. And what I used to hear were the sounds of some 60s music drifting through the walls, little Nancy Griffith once in a while, some Arlo Guthrie. Sometimes he'd pick up his guitar and he'd strum a few things and get ready for his class, and I could hear him prepping and doing that. And I really do miss those times. I miss sitting here in my office and hearing him rumbling about over there, preparing and just relaxing before class. But as I really think about the things that Pat Pritchard did here in this department, one of my funniest stories, one of my favorite things is when he told us the story of his son, who called his teacher over to get some help. I don't know on what, maybe a math problem, who knows. But as Pat told the story, the teacher was wearing an inappropriate blouse, let's just put it that way. And as she leaned over to help, I think it was Sean, with his problem, Sean came home and told Pat and Dad, when she leaned over to help me, her lung fell out. I tell that story in our Introduction to Education class when we start talking about professional dress every single time now, because we really advocate that we should be keeping our lungs inside our shirts and that they should not be falling out when we go to help students with their work. The other thing that I miss about Pat is how he would derail my department meetings. We would, getting ready for the PSC review, we would come in and have this whole long list of data and things that we needed to review, and we'd get 2 minutes in and he would throw out a question about what makes a better base for a banana pudding. Would it be a custard base or a milk pudding base? And then just the hell with it. It was gone. My whole meeting was gone, and we spent the entire time talking about the best way to make banana puddings. That happened way more than I can count. And I actually now miss having banana pudding discussions in my department meetings. And then finally, one of my other favorite stories about Pat is our seniors. We have a senior party at the end of every semester, every year with our seniors. And we have a tradition that when they declare their major as an education major, they ring a bell, an old school handbell. And so when they graduate, we give them a game that's called Bells, Bellz, and it's a science magnet game. And we started doing that when I came on board in 2010 or 11. And every year, as our seniors would unpack and unwrap their Bells game, he would be so excited. This is the coolest game ever. I've never seen this. Oh my gosh, Virginia, this is amazing. Pat, we give them this game every year. You say this every year, that this is the coolest game ever. But he found such joy every year in playing that game with them and saying that this was the first time he had ever seen it. I miss him so much. I miss his spirit. I miss his sound. I miss his food. I miss everything about him. And I'm so happy that we're having this memorial for him. He was well loved. He has left an impression on so many educators that have come through this program. I can't even begin to even name it. But for most importantly, he advocated for me to be here. He knew this is where I needed to be. He knew Westland needed me. He knew I needed Westland, and he went to bat for me. And he will forever hold a spot in my heart because of that. Sorry, there was one addendum to that story about the bells, and maybe you can edit this in, and if not, it'll just be a lovely out of order tribute again to Pat. So this is a man who every year had to be reminded that this is a bells game that we give our seniors every single year, and you have played this game for the past 5 or 6 years. He had to be reminded of that every single year. But yet, upon his retirement, we wanted to give him a piece of the Arboretum, the place that he was so instrumental in developing and bringing to campus here at Westland. And with the help of our physical plant, I found a piece of wood that had been planed when he and the other team of workers and faculty went out there and built the pavilion. And they cut the trees down and they planed them, and they built the pavilion out of the wood from the Arboretum that they had planed. And there was this beautiful piece of wood that had been left over and not used from that time. And we had a bench made for him out of that piece of wood. So here's a man who had to be reminded every single year that this is a game that you've played every single year that we've been doing this for the past 8 to 10 years. But yet he took one look at that bench when we presented it to him upon his retirement. He knew he knew the type of tree. He knew where it had been growing. He knew how old the tree was. He knew where it was. He knew who was standing beside him when it fell. He knew what they used to cut it down. He told story after story about how it got stuck and they had to cut 2 other trees down because it was so tall. Just simply amazing. So that's Pat. That was Pat. So something that he loved and cared for so deeply, he could remember the lyrics to songs from the 60s without blinking. He could tell you about every tree, every bush, every plant, every nook and cranny in that arboretum from memory, but couldn't remember that he played the same game every single year.
Patrick, I wonder how you remember our first interaction. It was by phone. I was in my office at Agnes Scott and you were in Macon. I was chairing a search for a new faculty member in education, and I must have posted my office phone number. It was about February 2002, nearly 20 years ago, and you called. And as the voice asked about the faculty opening, I realized that you were not asking for yourself. You were asking about a friend who was then in New York. I imagine your heart racing. I realized pretty soon that you were totally, deeply in love with this British academic, but you hid it well. Anyway, we spoke for long enough for me to understand that you too were an academic, also in education, and I encouraged you to have your friend call me and submit an application. And of course, the rest is history. I've treasured my friendship with both of you for such a long time.
One of my favourite recollections of Pat was, as you all know, he loved to make beer, and we all loved to drink it. So we got together one Saturday morning, and he was making a brew up, and I came in, and we're that busy chatting, and he was putting together a stout, and we were so busy chatting away, and I think we had a beer, but he ended up getting the recipe mixed up, and we thought we put molasses in one and we put sugar in another, and anyway, we got it all mixed up, and it turned out, okay. So it was a while later, he called me, maybe a couple of months, he called me all excited, and he had, unbeknownst to me, he had called the stout Belfast Tom Stout and put it into a competition, I think, in Atlanta. But he called me anyway, and he's like, Tom, he says, your stout won. I won the third prize in the competition. He says, there's only one problem. I said we could never make it again because we were that busy talking and drinking and messed up the recipe. But anyway, it was good enough. But dearly miss him both intellectually and socially, and but I know he's in a good place. So
here are my thoughts on Pat and what his life meant to me, and I don't think I'm alone in some of these thoughts and some of these ideas that came around by Pat's presence on this world. So I wrote a few things down. I'd like to share them now. In this world of 7-something billion people, there are countless problems, countless issues, and countless opinions, and really just a lot of everything. And it can be kind of easy to get sidelined and lose perspective and fall into a rabbit hole and watch our own mental health get eroded away by the constant barrage of decisions and gloom, and a sense that along with the planet, we're all on a fat road to nowhere. So in order to make sense of it all, to keep my head in a productive place, I needed a person in my life whom I could call when things stopped making sense, when I needed to know that kind people still walked this earth and did so successfully. For me, Pat was that person. Knowing he was out there made everything better, the wise man. For me, Pat was wise because he had been through so many different stages, so many different eras of his own life and his pursuit of being true to his calling. When I first met Pat, I was 6 years old. Pat's oldest son, Andrew, and I were fast pals, both of similar ages and similar interests. We would rake the grass cuttings on the sweeping field in front of our house where we lived on the international religious community while our parents sought Jesus. We would make hay, we would climb trees, and play in the forest that surrounded the communal living area. When Pat and his family moved out and disappeared into the surrounding world, I forgot about Andy and Pat and the rest of the Pritchard family until they reappeared years later and lived down the hall from me and my family. I was in high school at the time and surly and resentful of the pressing religious codes and demand for obedience to the community norms that kept thousands of members and teenagers alike in perfect sync with the authoritarian leadership of the community. Pat, I think, was drawn to the sacrifice and brother and sisterhood of the place, the idea that people could really belong and serve one another, which in itself is an attractive notion. My father, who was a leader of the community and a staunch believer, struggled to understand my internal and often very external rebellion to that community code. When he discovered my secret stash of forbidden rock tapes, which included albums of Def Leppard and Motley Crue and Bruce Springsteen, all of these known to be satanic worshipers, he was beside himself and turned to Pat for advice. As a peace offering for confiscating my collection of the devil music, he gave me a mixtape which Pat himself had put together for me, with lilting notes proffered by Simon and Garfunkel and Gordon Lightfoot and others, which I listened to so much the tape eventually broke from overuse. And still now, each song, when I hear it, reminds me very much of Pat. And sometimes I seek out certain songs just to be reminded of the man. It was years later, long after that I'd broken free from the community, that Pat and I crossed paths once again. He was working at a school for troubled boys and somehow found the phone number of where I was living on the 6th floor of a hippied out building on the north side of Chicago, building porches. For no reason at all, I answered the phone, which was always ringing and nobody ever answered, when I stepped out of the elevator. And to hear Pat's easygoing southern accent asking for Ted kind of blew me away. It was the only time that I'd ever received a phone call during my half year that I spent living there. Pat invited me on the call to come and join him and his family for Thanksgiving down in South Carolina. I accepted the offer and drove my 440 LTD Kawasaki motorcycle through 4 days of rain to join him at the Thanksgiving table. On Pat's encouragement, I stuck around at that school for young troubled boys, first starting as a janitor and then moving on to a different role as an instructor or a chief of a group. To say that the job was hard or challenging did not do justice to the damage that 10 emotionally disabled young men can do to a well-meaning yet very naive, insecure counselor. There were literally countless times that Pat sat listening to me as I tried to make sense of their wild behavior and sheer anger at the world, which was being channeled at me and the other counselors day in and day out. Even in the darkest days, Pat was able to guide me back into the trenches for yet another round, another day, another week. And during those first awful Trump years, Pat and I talked often. I needed to find out how to handle myself and make sense of it all. And while there are literally hundreds of anecdotes, and stories, and memories to share, when I think of Pat, the central message that outlives the details of these many incidences is the central Pat message: to follow your truth, wherever that may lead you, to be loving, gentle, and kind. And I still ask myself, what would Pat do? And then I pay close heed to the answer. So here's to you, Pat. Thank you for the message, for the laughs, for the many years together.
Rolling.
First going up? Okay.
Rolling.
I think about Pat a lot. I've never been able to call him Patrick. Even though he and I I'd say, hey Pat, this is Cat. Or he'd do the reverse, and we'd always kind of chuckle like we were in some Dr. Seuss book with Pat and Cat. When I think about Pat, it's always outdoors, whether it's carrying our lab puppy in his shirt when we were hiking the Hitchity Trail before she grew to be 80 pounds, or sitting around a campfire. What my children remember is singing Bye Bye American Pie around the campfire. But most memories of Pat involve being outdoors, which is no surprise to anybody.
I met Patrick in person in 2017 after he read an essay of mine on the fossils that time leaves. I was writing back then about a tiny little marine animal named a crinoid with multiple flower-like arms. One day, 170 million years ago, one of those crinoids was swept onto the beach by a high tide, which then rolled out and left the little guy stranded. It spent the last hour of its life crawling 80 inches, which must have seemed like 80 miles, toward the ever-receding sea before it died. It left a groove in the sand as it went, and that groove lived for a very long time, a fossil of sorts, a trace of one little life's final journey, finally discovered by archaeologists in 2016. These kinds of traces are left in space, but mark time. And after Patrick read the essay, he reached out on Facebook and invited me for a beer. That marked the beginning of a friendship between Paul and I and Patrick and Leslie. The friendship spanned so much. His famous Scuppernong parties, delicious cornbread from his homegrown glass-gem corn, the dinner he made with venison we brought him, the trip we took down to Cordelia, Georgia, where a farmer named Clay Oliver grows fields of sunflowers and hand presses culinary oils. He introduced me to his friend Rabbi Aaron Rubenstein, and I joined the synagogue. Pat connected to people and made connections for them as well. His wheel had many spokes. And so when I think today about Pat, it's not one single memory that comes to mind. It's his traces in time and space, his eternal traces of connection. Those traces do not die. They echo now and tomorrow, like music in space and time. All right, go.
Catherine and I met Pat very soon after we came to Macon back in 1997. He was always one of our very best friends, and he had a lot of very best friends. I think because he always saw the best in everyone around him. He always got excited about meeting new people, and he was a true friend to all of his friends, and I will definitely miss his sing-alongs where he got everyone else to perform as well as himself. He was just a very sharing, beautiful person, and I miss him every day.
I met Pat almost 20 years ago. I was a student at Wesleyan. I remember the first class I took with him. We barely knew each other. And right towards the beginning of class, he had just started his lecture. And all of a sudden, there's this knock at the door. And he opens it. And it's the police officer. He gets real serious. He, stands up real straight. And the cop's looking down at this pad of paper, and he's like, we need to speak with Victoria Wright. Is she in your room? Pat doesn't know, but I knew. I was driving a car with a license plate that was expired and registered to a different car that was probably like my dad's, and I had parked it illegally. It was like some super sketchy, complicated scenario. But Pat didn't know that. He just knew that this cop was interrupting his class asking for me. And he looks that cop right in his face and says, "No, you may not speak with her. You may not interrupt my class to speak with any of my students." Shuts the door. I remember sitting there like face red as a tomato and him looking at me like, "What have you gotten yourself into?" And everyone else looking at me. And he just went right on teaching. And I could see that cop's silhouette through the window. And at the end of class, everyone starts filing away. He tells me to wait, and I do. It's just him and I. And he said, "Listen, Tori, you don't have to talk to him. You don't have to talk to him. I'll walk out with you. You don't have to do it. I'll help you." It was like it was Kent State. He always had that part of him that loved to buck authority. That indignation. That never went away. We met at this time where he was so on fire about teaching, and I was so on fire about learning. We were a good pair. I was a TAP student, alternative preparation for teaching, and I had that just fire for it. That fear, I was so scared, and it mattered so much. I wanted to change the world through teaching. And I just wanted someone to give me the recipe. I just wanted someone to tell me exactly how to do it, and then I would do it, and then it was going to be a factory of world changing. I wanted Pat to teach me what to teach. And he never would. Instead, he sang Froggy Went A-Courtin'. We jumped rope. We sat around fires. We drank beer. We cooked together. We made maps. We wrote stories. We said prayers. What I learned from Pat was it's not what you teach. Those lessons are fleeting. They don't last. Nobody remembers that. I learned that teaching doesn't happen without a relationship. And relationships don't happen without connection. It's hard to connect now. People want to do it through social media and smart boards, virtual, interactive vocabulary quizzes. But Pat taught me that the best way to connect are the ways that we intrinsically know. Outside, walking in the woods, sitting around a campfire, eating a meal together, singing songs together. That's how we learn from each other. That's how you make relationships that last. I teach my own kids now, and I've taught them the way that he taught me, and I've taught hundreds of public school kids the same way. I doubt that any of them know what I taught. But I think, or I hope, that they know how I taught. The way he taught me. With compassion, with connection, with love. I hope I do him justice.
We're a group that represents our book club that Leslie is a member of, and we want to make it known how much we respect and honor Patrick. I knew Patrick before I ever knew him. I knew him through my husband, who was chairman of the board at Wesleyan College, and he talked about Patrick Pritchard, who was a very well-beloved professor at the college, and who also was very active with a group of faculty members who were interested in the woods behind Wesleyan College. And they were working on forming an arboretum behind the college, and they made paths and they had signage, they built benches, and I actually met Patrick for the first time in the arboretum where he was working one afternoon. The other thing that our book group is a very cohesive group, and we love each other very much. And one of the things that we always had was a party at Christmas time. And Patrick was a great contributor there in that he brought his guitar, and he was requested to bring it. And he led the singing, and we sang Christmas songs and other songs as well. And the thing that he also contributed was his cornbread. And I have his cornbread recipe here that he brought to the Christmas party, and it was absolutely delicious. So this is in honor of Patrick.
And I'm at another end of the spectrum from Tricia. I was the most recent to meet Patrick because I was away until 2016. And when I retired and came back to Macon, Leslie had joined the book group, and everyone knew wonderful Patrick, and we saw him parking cars for us when we would meet at Leslie's and building a fire, and he was just great. But I didn't really get to know him as well as until Christmas parties I remember two in particular where Patrick went out of his way to make the new person feel welcome, a very warm welcome. He would come over and sit down by me and talk to me about, my past and things that others knew about me and he didn't. And I found him to be such a generous, spirited, warm, fun, smart friend. Those are my recent memories of Patrick.
And I knew Patrick primarily through the Christmas parties too, and the wonderful gifts that he brought to those evenings. And I'll have to say the home that Patrick and Leslie created was always one that we enjoyed being in and meeting in. But it was only recently that I heard about his work with Woodfield Academy, and you know, sometimes it's surprising to learn things about people a little late, but I was really touched by that because I have a friend here in Macon who has a grandchild who attended Woodfield Academy and benefited so much from the opportunities there. And as a grandmother, I have a child who lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's 7, but began life with some challenges and really has had some difficulties with learning. And in his early years, he attended a daycare where there was a man who came in once a week to work with the kids with music, and had this wonderful booming voice that made kids get up and want to march around the room. And one day my grandchild, who wasn't walking too well, actually got up and wanted to march too. And so I know the power of the gifts that people like Patrick have, and am most appreciative of what they give to students.
And I think we would all agree that Patrick, when I think of Patrick, he was just a Renaissance kind of guy. He was so well-rounded. The first time we were introduced to him was by Chris Sheridan, his neighbor, who showed us the beautiful structure that Patrick had built with his own hands in his backyard. It was a beer house that was where he was going to craft beer. Patrick could do things with his hands. He had such a big heart and a brilliant and inquisitive mind.
I remember the first time I really became aware of Patrick. I was going to St. Francis Church, and it was after church. We all came out, and there was a huge rainstorm. No one could leave the building. And I was left sitting on the porch with this big collection of people waiting for the rain to stop, feeling kind of shy because I was new at the church. And Patrick was there, and he, for some reason, had his guitar. And he just pulled it out and began playing. And everyone started singing. There were songs we all knew the words to. And there was just this incredibly warm and friendly sense of community that grew up amongst us as we sat there. And if I remember it right, we kept doing it after the rain stopped. And when it was time to go, I was just so sad to leave. And I felt so now connected to this church family that have stayed over the past 25 years. Although I don't go to that church anymore, most of those people are still my good friends, and I'm so thankful for that experience, and so thankful to Patrick and his charisma that pulled us all together into a community. I remember just looking at him thinking that he was such a powerful person with the ability to attract everyone together, and it's always stayed with me.
And Patrick, I have to start off talking to you. I miss you, buddy. I really miss you. All of those, I first met you because Ramona took me to St. Francis. And you taught a Sunday school class. And I felt that same magnetism that you still have, the ability to draw people together. And you had your guitar, and you taught us all a Sunday school lesson. I can't at all remember what it was, but it was something. And you and I got to be good friends right then and there. And that was 1999 maybe. think it was. So it was wonderful. It still is. I first met Pat when Ramona introduced me to him at St. Francis Church. And we got to be good friends from the start. He was living at the Massey Apartments at the time. And I went and met with him, and just the more we talked, the nicer it got. He wanted to build a home for his two boys. He was particularly interested in doing that. And we got to know each other at a deep level as we talked about what his goals were and what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. He was just full of love and understanding at that time. It was a transition in his life. I was the architect. He was the builder. We shared that common love of building.
And hearing you talk about building a home, it makes me realize my concept of home has Patrick in it. We bought this piece of land, which became something bigger because Pat and Leslie were next door. And our houses, our homes, our families became something bigger than one household. It became a compound. And we still call it the compound now because of Pat and Leslie's presence. He just is infused throughout this place. And I cannot look out in the yard and not imagine that he is out there somewhere. And if I step off the porch and wander through the meadow, he'll be out there. He's just the expanded feeling of having his friendship and he and Leslie next door as another household that our children feel comfortable moving back and forth between like it's one family is what has made this our home place.
And Leslie, you and Pat have really impacted a whole nother generation. And my children and Ramona's children and their friends. They're friends from New York, they're friends from Colorado. They know y'all. They know y'all have meant so much to so many people.
The kids and the dogs. It gave the kids a bigger sense of home and family and security, especially after having lost their dad, to know that right next door was another set of parents that they could call in the middle of the night if they needed to, that they could go over and talk to, that were just steady presences that brought them stability. And we never got together where all our dogs weren't in tow, going in and out of each other's houses, stealing food off one another's coffee tables. Actually, that was just our dog that did that at your house. But there was just such a sense of big, intermingled family. And it's just been such a joy.
And we will never lose that sense. We'll never lose it. The first thing that we did when we moved in was, of course, we already knew Pat and Leslie, and we knew that was such a terrific piece of luck for us. But the first thing we did was tear down the fence between our properties. It was a celebratory day, and I think all four of us did it. And that fence has been gone, and it will never come back in every sense of the word. And the word compound, what a word, what a place to live. And Pat's magnetism, his ability to draw people in to celebrate life and to live in the present is something I can't yet quite put my finger on, but something that I want to emulate every way I can.
Something about the flow of life on this place came from the way Patrick drew everyone to him. There was always so much happening, whether it was friends that did music or brewed beer or were interested in gardening. He was always building something, a barn, a shed, doing these incredible things with his arbor and the deck of his fence, where he would take branches and just sort of smooth them down and entwine them together so they became nature's Chippendale. Everything just so natural and organic that he just had such a touch that I loved walking out in the yard and seeing what he was building next. And to go out in the yard and find him there was a normal thing.
We cut down pine trees and then sawed them up together. And then after a few months of drying, made furniture out of that same wood. And it was just the organic way that Pat taught us to live on this place is something that I will always cherish. And he amazed me, like Ramona said, with his organic building. We both build and make furniture, but boy, his was organic and flowing, and mine was square and straight and true. And both were good, but his was better. You know, it really was. It reflects the way that he has lived his entire life.
And that idea of the compound that was made compound simply because we shared it with another family who were Pat and Leslie, this world was so complete. We gardened and we could eat out of our gardens all summer. We built every structure on the land just about ourselves. But more than that, we could be self-contained here because Pat kept a flow of people coming through, different, interesting people, artists, poets, writers. There was always something interesting happening, and it was easy to kind of sit back and let it flow by, thanks to Patrick.
I learned what a house concert was. I never knew. But just, and the music. People gathering together, Joe Carlson and Jessica and Pat, was wonderful. Being in the Pat and Leslie's living room one time when Teresa and Sissy got up and gave us a stage presentation like you wouldn't believe. I didn't think it was in those two women, but they were just wonderful. And Pat had a way of drawing that type of fun out of people.
And he inspired you to be creative. You know, he would have a spoken word night and a musical night and a game night, and there was more.
Yeah.
But people would gather and really step up and share their creativity with one another in a way, as you said, it would surprise us about our friends' hidden talents that they had and open up avenues for us to be more creative. He generated life from everybody, more from you, more from the people around you. Everything was enhanced. He just enriched our lives so much.
I had no idea how to harvest mushrooms. And so Pat came over one day and told us the story about how he had harvested chanterelles in the backyard and cooked eggs, and that was his breakfast that morning. And he would always share those wonderful stories on Facebook, and I always look forward to seeing his posts.
Being neighbors with them was just so delightful because when we did have big gatherings, either at our house or theirs, the idea that afterward we just walked home across the meadow under a full moon.
Or stumbled home.
Just on a, as the evening wound down into dark night, there was just something wonderful about the thought that we're just going to walk next door and go home. And he was so attuned to nature. He loved the idea of place. But, with him and Leslie next door helping us recognize them, I saw a huge barred owl. We had foxes. He had stories about a baby deer leaping right outside his window, hiding from a coyote that came by a few minutes later and ran off again. He just observed things and helped us see them in a way that our life was so enriched.
That's the important thing, or one of the most important things for me was that he would always have a story that would go along with what the topic was at the moment. He would say, "Oh yes, I read about how the fox does this, this, and this, and here's how a barn owl does the following things." And he added an awful lot of just intellectual curiosity to every minute of every day. He was one of the, I don't see how he could read as much as he read, because he had something that he had just read to bring to every conversation.
Our lives are just so much fuller for having known him. He'll be with us always for the things he helped us see and appreciate, but we just miss him tremendously.
Pat, I get out in my wood shop. It's my happy place. And there's so many memories of you being there. And us just talking. Maybe about something important or something not important. But just sharing. And I'll still do that. So if anybody hears me talking to myself out there, then I'm really talking to you. And I feel your presence. I know you are there. And I look forward to a lot more woodshop time with you, my friend.
Hey everyone, I'm Ian. I was lucky enough to have Pat as a neighbor growing up, so I have a ton of memories of him, which for some reason in my mind he's always like sitting around a bonfire. But one memory in particular always comes up when I think about Pat, and it was when I was like 11 or 12. I'm sure I was even a little bit older, but I'm just sort of embarrassed to admit it. But I was home alone and I got really, really freaked out, and so I texted Pat and I was like, "Pat, like there's someone like prowling around my house, like I think it's a murder, I think it's a burglar or something like that." And instead of, sort of like shooing me aside or something like that, Pat took me at my word. And I remember he came over with a flashlight and a baseball bat. And he sort of, took a couple of trips around the, the yard and, sort of made sure that, no one was there. And afterwards, he of course had the grace to not come knock on my door and tell me that, of course there was no one there and that I was just freaking out. But instead just kind of sent me a text and, kind of respected that I probably didn't want to look him in the eyes for a couple weeks after that because I was pretty embarrassed. But it's just such a funny thing, and I always think about it whenever I think about Pat. And again, just sort of a small way to remind myself of kind of how loving he was and how present he was. And yeah, I'll miss him dearly, especially when I'm home. I really, really feel his absence. He was just so wonderful.
So we didn't get to know Patrick very long. We met him through our daughter. They taught together, they were colleagues, they were friends. And Patrick was a wonderful uncle to my grandson, our grandson. And we met Patrick and we had an instant sense of camaraderie. And
actually, when we met Patrick and Leslie both, we really felt like we will be friends with these people for a long time.
Yeah.
It was an almost instant feeling of that. So Patrick being gone so soon felt really awful, although
felt like we'd been robbed of of a future friend, of a loved one.
Patrick was instantly friendly and charismatic, and we absolutely loved that he and Leslie loved Oscar.
And Oscar just loved them and loved Patrick, and loved to hear Patrick play the guitar and sing, and loved the way Patrick laughed, and just wanted to be with him, wanted to be with Patrick.
So we may be, two of the people who knew him least of this video, but we really felt like we were friends, and we felt like we would become better and better friends, and we will with Leslie. But we felt a real loss, and
it's been painful to just terribly painful to not have him, to see that gone.
Yeah,
It's brutal.
it's hard to understand. And we've lost other people this year. And I have to say that his was one of the more devastating losses. Even though there are other people we've known longer, it was just that kind of connection to him. So, Patrick, we miss you and we will miss you.
You were loved, and you'll be missed deeply.
The first thing that comes to mind when I think of Patrick is just gardening and nature. He made me feel free and just happy. He had a way of just setting my mind at ease, and I could sit and listen to him tell stories about when he was younger, or just casually talk about some fox or deer he found in his garden. He just had a way of liberating my mind and my soul to just be present. One thing that I really admired about Patrick was he always managed to make anywhere a classroom. Every moment was a learning opportunity, whether he knew that or not. He taught me never to take anything for granted, and that's why I'm gonna miss him.
This is Sam McPhee, friend of Pat. I always felt like Pat and I had a special connection, even though he was born in 1950 in San Antonio and I was born in 1958 in rural East Georgia. We grew up having idyllic lives, riding around on our bikes with friends, building forts, looking for Indian artifacts. We both enjoyed building things. It wasn't work, it was fun, it was creative. One of my memories that I treasure is the first time I ever went foraging for mushrooms was with Pat and Leslie at the Arboretum. I'd never done that before, opened up my eyes, I've never looked back. In fact, I know of this spot right now with these delicious oyster mushrooms. So, my hands, but your heart, I'm picking these for Leslie and hope she'll enjoy them. Love you, Pat.
Hello, we are Sam and Ruth Stelsfus from upstate New York. I first met Pat in 1983 at Fairplay Wilderness Camp. He served as a teacher at the camp, and I just remember his gentle, kind way of dealing with the boys that were in his care. I moved back to New York in 1984, and over the next number of years, we had minimal contact with Pat, but really had kind of lost touch. But all that changed in 2014 when we found ourselves in Macon, Georgia, under some unexpected circumstances that we're going to be talking about.
Yes, a lot of beautiful memories come flooding back to me as I reflect on Pat's life. In 2014, we met up in a strangely complex yet almost divine manner. Our son Michael ended up in Macon at the hospital, and through mutual friends, we were directed to Pat, who offered us a room for the night or a place to shower or pretty much anything we may need. When it looked like we truly may be there for more than a night or two, we took him up on his offer. First, it was a place to shower, then a place to sleep for one night, which turned into not one night, but 5 weeks of living in the guest house in Pat and Leslie's backyard. In the days that turned into weeks, we suggested numerous times that we book motel rooms for us and the family members who were visiting. The answer was always the same: you're not bothering anyone, and this is your space for as long as you need it. What incredible generosity we experienced. Having this place to come to was a haven after the world of doctors, nurses, and the ICU and the complexities that surrounded our son's illness. Pat encouraged us to stop at his house for breakfast before we headed into the hospital. He made the best French press coffee and homemade sourdough toasted bread with scappernag or muscadine jam. If we came back to the property at any time, Pat was always eager to hear if we had any news about our son. We are forever grateful for Pat's kindness and the care for us during this time.
Yesterday, while I was sitting here, the photo of Patrick that I'd received by email the day before yesterday suddenly flashed vividly before my mind, and within minutes, this song had emerged from my guitar. I call it Patrick Pritchard's Waltz. I miss you, Patrick.
Hey everyone, it's Reed. Took a little walk to gather some thoughts and feel like they're pretty much gathered well enough now to record something. And I was thinking, rather than saying a specific story or, trying to find something that typifies Pat, in one interaction, that I did more just want to talk about sort of what I, as a young man, observed of his lifestyle and the way it affected me. And this is not to say there aren't specific memories of Pat. I can see him now in the beer is food shirt, which I really love. And I can certainly hear my mom telling every new compound guest, he sold everything he owned and joined a cult twice, with the same little comedic beat. But I think the thing I was thinking about Pat is just that, at first, to put it quite simply, he was an old person. This is hard to find in Macon. He was a person older than me that was cool. He had a sense of style. He just had a sense of lifestyle. I mean, all you have to do is sort of look at his house, and the 5 different components of it, and the intermingling of the nature and the build, to know that he did have a sense of style. And, that's sort of a generic observation in its own right, but it sort of reminded me of a conversation I was having with a friend the other day, where we were talking about what is wisdom or what is insight, and we sort of landed on the idea that, wisdom or insight are sort of ways, they are bits of knowledge or bits of perspective that sort of elucidate your own life to yourself, that take something where you've had all the pieces, and they are that sort of final bit of instruction that allows you to put them together and find sort of narrative and direction and meaning in a situation that you already were so immersed in. And I do think about someone like Pat, someone that is from my parents' generation and Chris's generation, and nonetheless he had something that I connected with that then allowed me to turn and connect more with my own family and with the place I am from that I might have struggled to find beauty in or much merit in at all as an angsty 13-year-old. And someone like Pat, who led a meaningful life and chose to live in Macon, Georgia, and chose to represent the elements he did in our community, and then chose to associate with people like my family. Again, he really, through the way he lived, helped me have more understanding and compassion and enthusiasm for my own circumstances. And that to me is an enormous legacy. That is leading by example through a sort of osmosis. It's not like he said, Reed, you should brew your own beer or anything that direct, but through him doing things he was passionate about and doing them with truly something I think is all important, with a sense of individuality and style and purpose. He sort of offered me a gateway to viewing people that I now have so much more love and understanding for in a charitable way. So I love all of you, and that's, when I think about Pat, that's what I think about.
Redondo y colorado, como una rueda de cobre, de diario me estás mirando, de diario me miras, sol que tú eres tan parejo para repartir tu luz. Habías de enseñarle al amor a ser mismo que tú. Una vez en la llanura y otra vez en la Habías de enseñarle al amor
This is one of our favorite songs that we played with Patrick, and he loved the song, and we loved doing it with him. And funny thing is that none of us could remember the order of the lyrics because they're kind of similar, so we're all
It's like,
singing.
if I needed you, would you come to me? Would you come to me for
If
the
you needed
for the
me,
ease
not
one?
if you needed me.
See, we still can't.
That's the whole. So everybody was singing it different, but it really didn't matter because we knew what we meant, right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
we love doing this with Patrick, so this is for Patrick.
If I needed you, would you come to me? Would you come to me for to ease my pain? If I needed me, would you come to me? Would you
Well, that's pretty much the point.
This will be in the outtakes.
Yeah, the bloopers. Here we go. Let's try it again.
Okay. Alright, here we go. Take 50. If I needed you, would you come to me? Would you come to me for to ease my pain? If you needed me, I would come to you. I would swim the seas for to ease your pain. Well, the nights for long and mornings born, mornings born with the light of love, and you miss sunrise if you close your eyes. That would break my heart in two. If I needed you, would you come to me? Would you come to me for to ease my pain? If you needed me, I would come to you. I would swim the sea for to ease your pain. Maybe he's with me now, since I showed her how to lay her lily head in mine. The band will agree, she's sad to see, a treasure for the poor to find. If I needed you, would you come to me? Would you come to me for to ease my pain? If you needed me, I would come to you. I would swim the sea for to ease your pain. I would swim the seas for to ease your pain.
We love you, Patrick.
Patrick held many roles in my life. He was an educator, he was my mentor, he was friend, and he was my family. I could share so much about his joy and his love and his music and his food and his hospitality and the way he communed with nature. There was a lot of depth to Patrick. Even with all these wonderful qualities, I have one memory that sticks in my mind when someone mentions Patrick. It was a moment from our wedding. At our wedding, we followed some Filipino traditions, one of which was a lighting of a candle by typically a family member of each spouse-to-be that signified the passing of wisdom. For me, I asked Patrick to play this role. Patrick for me was the embodiment of wisdom. He was always the person I would call if I needed life advice. He would spend hours with me talking over some quandary that I had, a problem on the phone or in person, and he was more than happy to do it. He had many admirable traits. He understood what it was to truly learn, to grow, to experience life, to care, and to love others. He was so humble. I would be honored one day to even be half as wise as he was. Now that he's gone, whenever I'm stuck or at a loss, I often pause and think to myself, what would Patrick do, or what would Patrick say about this, to find myself a way out of trouble. Back to the day of our wedding, as Patrick lights the candle, he looks over his shoulder right at me. There is a twinkle in his eye and the most radiant smile. It was as if he was shining hope for us, for our future. And I felt this overwhelming familiar love coming from him. This is the moment that I will forever carry of Patrick in my heart. Moving forward, that twinkle, that smile, that hope and joy, it's everything that Patrick was. Patrick, you're my family, and I miss you dearly.
Hey Leslie, it's Doc and Steph, and we just wanted to start out by saying how much we have loved to get to know you guys together over the last probably, 15 years or so. Mm-hmm. And, one of the biggest things initially for Steph and I was when we first met y'all, how close you, Ramona, and Chris were, and just the safety and just that net that y'all provided to each other. And it's just meant so much to us as children that we felt like our parents were in a safe spot and with wonderful people. And
I'd say another thing that we love about Pat is, as you know, whenever we were together, it always seemed like there were so many people running around, usually a holiday that we were celebrating, and so much going on. But Pat always had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. I'm gonna get teary. Sorry, talking about that.
But anywhere from his stuffed pumpkins to
talking about his beer to talking about the trips that you all had taken overseas, they were always captivating. But I think one subject that Doc and I can
just
always
in closing, one of our is probably our biggest thing that just bonded us more than anything was the love that we had for our animals and Duke and Lucy and everything else. And now we know we got a good man up there taking care of our babies, and we look forward to seeing them one day, and God bless.
I met Pat after my dad moved into the house next to him. So the first time we met was when I was home for the holidays. He had such a warm and welcoming presence that even when we first met, it somehow felt as if I had always known him. Seeing him and hearing all that he had been up to immediately became a highlight of my trips home.
So many lovely memories of Patrick and Leslie when they stayed with us in Edinburgh, and I know Patrick loved Scotland so much. One of the funniest times we had when they were staying with us in Edinburgh with Anne and Edmund, and Edmund was giving Patrick a masterclass on whiskey tasting. So Patrick duly took I don't know how many different types of whiskey that night, and then just sat giggling in the corner for the rest of the evening. It was just super. And then the next morning, we gave him our other national drink, Iron Brew, and that was to quench his thirst, which he thoroughly enjoyed as well. I just loved having him here.
Patrick was always amazing company, and he was always on such good form. It's hard for me to pick out a specific moment, but I'll always be grateful for the wisdom and the laughs he shared with us.
Patrick.
My name is Olivia, and Patrick was my next door neighbor from the time when I was about 14 or 15. I remember Pat from even before we moved to the compound because I went to St. Francis Church growing up, and Pat was such a figure there. I remember all the kids in the youth group were like a little bit in love with him, halfway had a crush, halfway wanted him to like be our dad. Pat kind of had that way about him where you just wanted to be around him and you weren't even sure exactly how, and you didn't even care in what capacity. You just for me, I wasn't sure if I was like idolizing him or just a little bit in love with him, and probably both. Um, I have always seen Pat as such a sweet, gentle figure, but also like so engaging, never passive, always exciting and funny, and never, never, never without a great story. Anything I had done or thought of, he had a tale to tell that related to it. He had done it or knew someone that had done it or thought about doing it. And inevitably, whatever topic I brought up, Pat somehow knew more about it than me. Even if I was the one like studying it or talking about it, he always had some kind of like insider info that I didn't have, and that like made it way more interesting than whatever I would have thought or said about it. He really felt like a sort of surrogate parent to me in a lot of ways. He was very paternal and loving, and I could look up to him, but I didn't feel any judgment. I knew that I could tell Pat anything, and he would hear me out. And I really, really appreciated having that kind of relationship with an adult, someone that I thought was so smart and so interesting and so thoughtful, and someone that took me seriously and didn't treat me like a kid, even though I was a kid. He made me feel like my opinion mattered, and like what I had to say mattered to someone. Like I could be interesting too, and that is not something that a lot of people get, period, especially not, teenagers from adults, and especially not adults as like interesting and cool and smart and worldly as Patrick. I remember for one of my birthdays, he made me a special beer in his barn, and he made all these bottles, and he had like a print of this like zebra statue that we have in our yard, and he called it Femme Ale. I think it was for my 21st birthday, and I just thought it was so thoughtful and clever and nice that he went to the trouble to do it for me. And I remember I saved several of the bottles because I just thought like the art was so beautiful, and who else is cool enough to have like a whole brew named after you? Like it was such an unusual and neat thing. It has been bizarre to process the fact that Pat is gone. I think I still haven't totally accepted it. He just is, for me, one with what I think of as home. He is home for me. He is family. He is what it feels like to get back when I've been gone for a year or away at school. Patrick is so synonymous with that feeling, that kind of nostalgic, finally I can rest my head, finally I'm around people that know me well feeling for me, that I just don't really even know how to understand my home without Patrick as a part of it. So I'm really grateful for this chance to memorialize him and talk about him, because I love him and I felt very loved by him. And, there's just no question that my life, without him just will never be the same. Home will never be the same. And I'm just grateful for the time that I got to know him, and for this time to celebrate him with other people that love him.
I was especially blessed to know Pat Pritchard in two ways. One was that we were fellow Texans of similar political leaning and the same generation, with our social morality shaped by the likes of Molly Ivins and Ronnie Duggar and the Texas Observer. The second is that I was privileged and blessed to serve as his priest for some time, and during that time we had some special communication. I say this because I know that Pat had so many strengths and virtues and compelling qualities that you'll be mentioning those of you contributing to this memorial. He was wise and intelligent and musically gifted. He was a great professor, musician, and friend,
And I know that you will mention all of those strengths, and rightly so. But as his priest, I heard just as much about his sense of vulnerability, about his regrets, about his anxieties, about the situations in his life where he just really didn't know what to do. And that vulnerability, that sense of struggle, is where life gets real, and it's where relationship gets real, because we all have our vulnerabilities, either acknowledged or unacknowledged. And when someone is self-aware, as Pat was self-aware, they're able to connect. That self-awareness and that striving to connect and to engage life authentically was true of Pat his entire life, especially toward the end. When he would be struggling to communicate, he was really engaging life at the deepest, most authentic level. And for that, I will be eternally grateful.
Well, hello there. My name is Pam Webster, and I am standing at the entrance to one of the trails at the Arboretum. I hope I can get this done before the rain starts back. But anyway, I wanted to just talk a little bit about Pat and share some memories. I first met Pat a little over 30 years ago when I was asked to come do a Passover Seder for the children at St. Francis Church. Pat was out on the porch playing a guitar or a mandolin. I don't remember which at the time, and that evening we made a fast connection. Most of our interaction over the years has been about education, especially outdoor education, and the importance of bringing the natural environment into the lives of children so that learning could be easier and less stressful and more joyful and really natural, which is their natural state. Pat introduced me to a book called The Last Child in the Woods, and that book made a profound change in how I viewed education. Even though I was teaching in the public schools as a special ed teacher, I was still able to incorporate so many of the things that we talked about. Pat also invited me many, many times to speak to his classes at Wesleyan College, to talk about my journey in education and to talk about brain gym and educational kinesiology and how I incorporated that into my classroom. You know, I've heard people say that Pat was a builder. He built houses, he built furniture, he built bridges, he built relationships, and I think that what a gift that is to have been a builder of so many connections for so many people. There's a saying that people come into your life for a reason, a season, and a lifetime. And I think that Pat's one of these people that came into my life, as well as the lives of many people, for a reason, a season, and a lifetime. Even though he is not physically with us at this time, I know that we all will never forget our experiences with him, what he taught us, and I hold that dear to my heart. Thank you, Pat.
Good morning, Patrick. This is our memories from Stuart, Jane, Matt and Dan. I thought it appropriate to shoot this on the Cathedral Green because I know this was one of the places you loved in England. The city town of Wells, or the tiny city of Wells. So I thought I'd shoot it here and share some memories from your life with us. It's all very hard because you've been taken too quickly, too soon away from us and left a big hole. But let's share some memories. And they start really from when we first met you, back in all those years back when the boys were younger in Atlanta. And that first trip, you know, they introduced you to, or you introduced them to all sorts of things like Foursquare in the yard and painting Lucy's kennel bright red, and hand churning ice cream, which they'd never done before, with Sean in the yard. A real introduction to Patrick and what Patrick brings to life, which was enthusiasm and just a joy of life. And then we've got to know you more of the years when you've been coming to England, bringing your love of music, your love of food, finding out how we do things over here and sharing those back when you went back in America, and trying to bring recipes like flan over here, which never really worked. And of course your love of the pun, which luckily I enjoyed. Also, I think the essence of Patrick is about learning. It's about the curiosity you had about life. It's about then when you found out things, how you wanted to share that. Natural teacher, natural sharer, and one of the nicest men I've ever met, the biggest heart, and the nicest person to spend time with. And that's extended really. I thought an illustration of that was last year when unfortunately we lost my father to a terminal illness, and you knew you wouldn't get there to see him before the end, so you got some friends around to play some music and then send that video over so he could share that time with you. And I was there when I played it with him, and it was a special moment, and it was a particularly Patrick moment, thinking about somebody and sharing what you could share with them. So we were all very touched by that. And personally, well, for me personally, I think your interest in my sailing exploits. As soon as I started sailing the oceans, you were so enthused, and your joy of actually sharing that with me when I took you out on my boat, and your very, very awful pirate "arr" imitations were something to behold. And it's also where one of my biggest regrets is, because I always said that we would sail the English Channel together, and we would have done it last year if it wasn't for COVID. And now we won't. Now we won't. But the next time I do it, I will take you with me, and you'll share that experience with me in a different way. So really, I just want to say that you leave us with a heavy heart. You're a big void in our lives, but you also leave some really, really happy memories. And if you're listening, I want to say thank you for the love you've given this family, and especially the love you've given my sister. Over the years, it's been wonderful, and you will live on in our memories. So, Godspeed and peace with you. Thank you, Patrick.
All day today. Doing some recording here, saying a little something for Mr. Pat.
Pat was my fourth grade teacher, and I have fond memories of lots of playing and not much learning, but I'm sure there was learning. But I've known him since then, and especially appreciated his kindness and hospitality. His house was always open and a warm, welcoming place for us. And he was one of those people that kind of just showed up at a point in my life when I was kind of floating and directionless, and helped keep me grounded and stable. And yeah, great man, beautiful soul. We miss him.
And I just want to thank him for his generosity of spirit. He was a very giving person. We're always doing something, always busy, but I was thankful for the times that he took to show me something about, the silly question I had, and, to help me learn something. Thank you for that, Pat.
So thank you, Pat. Thank you for who you were in the world. Thank you, Leslie. We love you both.
Love you. Bye-bye. Quick part two, we also want to say thank you to Mr. Pat for marrying us and the beautiful experience of our wedding. I can't think about him and my love for Hadassah without just cherishing that time and those moments.
And that choice to request to have him marry us, and marry us at his place in Macon, just came naturally. Like, it's always felt like a home to me. And so it was really perfect and beautiful to be able to have that experience, and it's something that we will definitely cherish forever. So, again, thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay, ready to go?
I always looked forward to seeing Patrick. He was such a great listener and a great speaker. Always gave 100% attention when you were talking, and I forgot what I was going to say.
Just start again. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go on then.
Although Patrick and I didn't see each other very regularly, maybe only once a year, we always got on really well, and he was an excellent talker. That's a tractor in the background. So again. Okay, let's go.
I always really looked forward to seeing Patrick. He was so lovely to talk to, a really good listener, gave you 100% of his attention, and I particularly enjoyed chatting to him about our shared interest in Forest School education, and I loved his passion for young people.
Want to say something now, Will?
What I loved about Patrick was that me and him both loved hot rods, and he could tell me how to identify Pontiacs. And now I know exactly how to identify a Pontiac Trans Am.
Whenever I talked to Patrick, he was just really nice, and I loved his beard.
Yeah, I found Patrick really easy to talk to, and it was always fun to just have a conversation with him.
I think what I liked about Patrick was that although we didn't see each other very often at all, whenever we did, we could easily get into a really excellent conversation. And I think I always wanted to spend some time with Leslie, Patrick and their friends having what sounded like a hoedown in Macon with lovely craft beer at just the right temperature, which he told me about, and excellent live musicians, and that sounded brilliant. And hopefully we will do that and raise a glass to Patrick in the future. To Patrick.
We'll miss him.
To Patrick. To Patrick.
To Patrick.
To Patrick.
Okay, that was good. Well done, everyone.
Yeah.
You really wanted attention.
I'll start again. The Battle of the Bulge, the Siege of Bakerston, December 16th to 26, 1944, Bakerston, Belgium. My men don't take foxholes. Foxholes only slow up an offensive. Keep moving. We'll win this war, but we'll only win it by fighting and showing the Germans that we've got more guts than they ever have or ever will have. And George S. Patton said that in a speech to the U.S. Third Army. Just 6 months after D-Day, it was already starting to look like if the German army in the West was done for. Unyielding American troops were approaching the Rhine River toward Germany. British forces were surging up the north boot of Italy, and Russian tanks were rolling across Ukraine as quickly as their treads could carry them. Hitler was stretched too thin. He didn't have the manpower to defend his homeland on all three sides at the same time. All was left to drive him to the heart of Germany. With his back against the wall and his ambitious, kill every non-German person in the world plans crumbling around him, Hitler decided it was time to bet it all on the last-ditch Hail Mary long bomb to change the ending of World War II. He committed the last of his reserve troops, all of them, to blitzing through the softest part of the American lines, crossing the Meuse River, capturing the Allied supply base at Antwerp, and cutting off or annihilating the entire 21st Army Group in Holland. If he could somehow maneuver Germany into a powerful position against Western allies, maybe Britain and the United States would make peace, and Hitler could dedicate all his energy to battling Russia. Sure, none of Hitler's top generals really thought it was a smart idea, a good use of resources, or even a little bit achievable, but it's not like he asked them anyway, so who cares? We love you and miss you, Grandpa, and we will when you were still alive.
Hi, my name is Ada. Pat will always hold a really special place in my heart. He was just one of those people that that just had so much love, and he knew my siblings and I when we were kids, and growing up on a Christian community, and later on we left and got back in touch with him, and he welcomed us so warmly into his house and into his family, and I felt from the beginning just like family with him and Leslie, and we'll always be so grateful for that and appreciative of that. And he had an understanding for the worlds that we were navigating, and I loved his ability to have deep conversations, to be able to talk about anything, and then also to turn around and just be really silly and lighthearted. And last year sometime, I texted him congratulations, Granddaddy Poo Poo, and he responded back, what? Question marks, and gave me a call. And years before that, he had earned the name Daddy Poo Poo as something of a father figure, as a goofy father figure, Daddy Poo Poo. And so he was getting ready to accept the name of Granddaddy Poo Poo, and the news was that I was pregnant. And I think he was really stopped in his tracks by that news, as I was someone who had been very vocal about not reproducing. And so when he called me, he, how did this happen? You of all people. And I was like, well, Pat, sometimes when a man and a woman really love each other, and he's like, la 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 la, okay, enough, stop. And we had a good laugh about that. But that was kind of representative of his ability to just be silly. And I was so excited for him to meet Alden, and I want to believe that they met in passing, when Pat was leaving and when Alden was coming in, and because they didn't meet physically in this world. But I know he would have just had so much love for my son, and yeah, we will always hold a place in our hearts for Pat, and we love you, Pat. We love you, Leslie.